Bandy, and this is my channel Bandysbooks. Today it's the end of November and I am just gonna do a end of the month update to kind of give you an idea of what I've been reading this month, how I rated things, what genres I read, a little bit of information about my goals for the month. I did read quite a few books, so these are going to be kind of just me going through them quickly, so we're not here for like 2 hours. If you're interested in more detail, I do a segment where I do a 5-minute book review every Wednesday. You can find a link to that playlist up here somewhere. Several of the books that I'm talking about now will be popping up in that playlist very soon. And I'm going to go ahead and go over these books based on like the rating category. So I'll go from lowest to highest. And if I have a physical copy, of course I'll hold it up and show you the book. And if not, over here somewhere, a graphic will pop up of the cover of that book so that you can kind of see what I'm talking about. So let's go ahead and get into it. So briefly before I start, I'm just going to give you kind of an example of how I rate my books. If you're new to this channel, the only reason I'll ever give a book a 1 star is if I DNF it. In order for me to DNF a book, I have to have attempted to read it 3 times. So, because I've had this happen before where I've read a book and then didn't really love it, so I put it down and then came back to it at a later point in a different headspace and actually ended up really liking the book. So I set this rule for myself where if I'm going to DNF a book, I have to give it 3 separate tries. So that would be the only reason I'll rate a book a 1 star. A 2 star is going to mean that the book, I completed the book, but it had serious issues. Maybe it was really hard for me to finish the book. I felt like there was big plot problems, characterization problems, flow and pacing issues. It's going to be something that I feel like could still use quite a bit of work. A 3-star a 3-star book rather, is going to be a book that was reasonably good. I don't have any major complaints. There might be some minor issues here and there or some things that I didn't love overall, but it's not necessarily a bad book. Still worth a read in my opinion. 4-star is going to be a really good book, a book I'm happy that I read, a book that I'm definitely going to recommend, and a book that I'll buy myself a nice hardcover copy of and put on my bookshelves. And then finally, a 5-star review. For me, a 5-star review means that a book was basically perfect. I had no complaints with it. I liked all the characterization, the plot, the pacing. I liked, everything about it. And for me, I'm not trying to be like a super critical reviewer, but I don't generally have a ton of 5-star reviews in a month. Not to say that I don't ever have any, but I am, generally like more on the 4-star range. So we're going to go ahead and get into it. This month was really like all over the place. I had some lows, I had some highs, a lot of different genres and everything. So I'm first going to just talk about how my genres were split. There's going to be a little pie chart that pops up over here. But basically, I split into, sorry, I have my notes down here, so if I'm looking down, that's what it is. I had 3 self-help books, a handful of historical fiction. The majority of my books were in the contemporary fiction category. I had a suspense, a fantasy, and a memoir. So it was a nice mix of a bunch of different genres and, kind of allowed me to kind of switch up my reading style here and there, which is great. Especially after last month in October, I was really, really focused on reading suspense and horror, which, obviously it's like darker themes. So this month it was kind of nice, like being able to switch between different genres. The main thing that I wanted out of this month was to read books that were going to have more of an emotional impact. So although they're across a lot of different genres, that's the thing that most of them have in common, is that they have some sort of emotional impactfulness. So yeah, let's get started with going over the actual books. Okay, so I'm going to start with the lowest ranking books and I'm going to go up to the highest. So I did have 1-star read this month, and that's pretty unusual for me. I actually haven't 1-starred a book in a very, very long time. The book that I 1-starred and DNF'd was No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. I really wanted to like this book, and I just couldn't get into it. I tried 3 different times, as I said. I read 50 to 60 pages each time, and I just really couldn't find my place with this book. If you want more detail on that, I did do a 5-minute review on it. The link's up here. You can click on that and find out a little more about why I didn't like that book. But generally, I just felt like it was like trying to read memes if you only saw the text and didn't have the picture. A lot of it was really nonsensical and just didn't make sense. So unfortunately, I didn't care for that book. That doesn't mean that you won't, or that other people don't. I've actually heard a lot of good things about this book, and maybe I just personally didn't read far enough into it. But that would be my 1 star. I did have a physical copy of it, but I actually gave it to my mom over Thanksgiving for her little free library. So cover will be popping up over here. Next up is books that I rated 2 stars. So there's a handful of them, and for me, when it's a 2 star, like I said, that means that there's some pretty serious problems with the book, in my opinion. Again, my opinion is subjective. I am not an authority on books. I don't have any kind of literature degree, so take what I say, with a grain of salt. It doesn't mean that you won't love it or that someone else didn't love it, just not me. So the books that I rated 2 stars, again, the covers are going to pop up over here, was Survive the Night by Riley Sager, I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter by Erica L. Sanchez, Mind Over Magic by Lindsay Buroker, and The Subtle Art of Not Giving a by Mark Manson. So, just briefly, Survive the Night is a suspense thriller. It's about a girl who is sharing a car home from college back in I want to say the early 90s or late 80s. She's going from her college back to her hometown, and she signs up for a rideshare on her campus billboard. There's a serial killer on campus that's killing girls, and her best friend recently got murdered, and throughout the ride she comes to suspect the gentleman she's driving with of being the serial killer. The reason I rated it 2 stars was because it was just so inconceivably unlikely. I understand suspension of disbelief in stories, but if you have to suspend how everything in the world works to believe a story, I think there's a reasonable amount of suspension of disbelief. And then when you're grounding a story in reality, like they are in this case, it gets to a point where I just can't take the story seriously. I found that there was a lot of problematic themes in the book. I didn't love it. I got through it, but for me, it just was a really big miss. I rated that one 2 stars. I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter by Erica Sanchez. For me, this one was hard. I really wanted to love this book. Really, really. This was one of my most anticipated reads for this month. Unfortunately, I found all of the characters extremely unlikable. And I think that to a certain degree, we're supposed to not like most of the characters. We're supposed to see them as flawed human beings, and that definitely was accomplished. But for me, it's kind of the same problem that I have with A Catcher in the Rye, where it's just constant whining and constant complaining. And while there are things for this character to reasonably complain about, it just, I don't know, it was daunting. And worse for me was that I felt like everybody in the book was a very negative stereotype. I felt that there could have been a lot more depth put into the characters. I was looking for a searing critique of society, and while it did critique society in certain ways, I wish that it had been handled a bit differently. Again, I've seen rave reviews about this book, so my opinion is only my opinion. You may really love it. You may pick up something that I missed. And then Mind Over Magic was a book that I won from Goodreads as an ebook, and Lindsay Buroker is a pretty well-known indie author. She writes science fiction, fantasy, and I've read tons of good reviews on her work. I know that many of her other stories are very highly rated. This particular book for me, there was pacing issues, plotting issues, characterization issues, toxic relationships, lots of things for me that just don't work. I actually did win a trilogy of one of her other series, so I'm going to give her a second go and read a whole trilogy of her, one of her sci-fi series, because that one was really highly rated. Based on the reviews that I read, it kind of just seems like this is probably not her best work. So, take that as it is. And then The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. This book has so much hype. I read everywhere about it, about how it's life-changing, blah, 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 blah. I'm sorry that I have to be the bad guy here, but the author comes across like a straight-up douchebag. everything is about, oh, how many chicks I laid, how much money I make, how I don't treat my wife well, and I don't give a fuck. And like, I get that the central theme is not over stressing about things, that like when we put too much pressure on things, things don't go well. And I do think that that message is important, and I think there is some validity to it. But I just really hate the college frat boy presentation of the book. And maybe, you know, other people can get past that, but for me, I don't want to read page upon page upon page of some dude bragging about his sexual conquests or his toxic relationship with his wife. For me, it detracted from any meaningful message in the book, and that's why I rated that one 2 stars. So those are my 4 2-star reads this month. Again, for me, they're pretty problematic. I wouldn't necessarily recommend them. Next up are my 3-star reviews. So for me, like I said, a 3-star is going to be a book that I enjoyed, but maybe has some things that I wish were a little different. That could be plotting, pacing, characterization, anything, but it's not going to be like catastrophic. It's just going to be, you know, this could have been better. So the books that I rated for 3 stars, again, covers are going to pop up over here, is The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper, The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, You're a Badass by Jen Sincero, and Cold Morning by Brenda Chapman. So The Wolf Den was an ARC that I received from NetGalley, and it is set in Pompeii back in the day, and it is set in a brothel. So the main character is a sex worker working in this brothel, and she used to be a doctor's daughter, and then after her father passed away, she's, you know, hit with hard times and sold into slavery. She really hates the man that she's been sold into slavery to. And it's kind of about her day-to-day life in Pompeii, the friendships and the bonds that she's formed with the other sex workers, and her desire to kind of claw her way back out of sex work and into a different place in life. This book has really, really heavy themes, obviously, of slavery, forced sex / rape, and some other adult themes. Overall, I liked the book. I thought that it was a really interesting concept. I liked that it was set in Pompeii. I liked that it was paying attention to an often forgotten class of people. I think my main concern or my main issue with this book was that I felt like the dialogue was very modern sounding. Like, the characters greet each other with like, hey, you know, how's it going? And it just, to me, it sounded like somebody in current times talking, not like a character from that day. And it's not like, you know, they have to be Shakespearean or anything, but I think there could have been a little more work done to make them sound authentic to that period of time. I also found that the story dragged a little bit in points. It was overall really interesting, but there was points where I felt myself, you know, feeling like it was a little tedious. But I think it was well worth the read, and I'm really, really grateful to NetGalley for the ARC and to Elodie Harper for, you know, allowing me a chance to read it early. It was a good story overall, and I think it would be worth the read. Next up is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, and that is one that is so popular, and I read so much about, and I was so excited to read, and then I just felt really disappointed in it. My main concern with The Midnight Library is that I feel like it oversimplifies depression. The main theme, without spoiling anything, is a person suffering from depression. And I can't really say much more about it without destroying the book, but it just, to me, it almost came across insulting to depression sufferers by making it seem like a few simple life changes and life is all good. And depression's really not that way. I personally deal with it myself, and I know that it's not as simple as just, oh, change your perspective, go for a walk, you know, do these handful of things and everything's magically better. And that's the way it felt reading that for me. There was definitely a lot of creativity in it. I do think it was a good story. There are heartwarming parts of it. I would recommend reading it. But if you read it and you deal with depression, or, you know, someone you love deals with depression, go into it knowing that it's not the most accurate portrayal of depression, in my opinion. And then You're a Badass by Jen Sincero. This is in the self-help genre. It's basically convincing you to have better self-esteem, talking you up, you know, teaching you how to be confident in yourself. I overall thought that the message was really good, and I actually listened to it on audiobook, and Jen Sincero narrates it, and she does a great job with the narration on audiobook. My main concern is that I just felt like the message was a little too simple for such a large book. I think that it could have been covered in a couple pages, and it went on for quite a lot longer than it really needed to, with just the same message being repeated over and over again. So nothing wrong with the message at all, just like a little bit redundant. And finally, Cold Morning by Brenda Chapman. This book was really interesting. I didn't really know a whole lot about it. I found it on the Libby app, and it is a police detective mystery sort of a book set in Canada. The main character is Indigenous. She has a past that's haunting her, and she's going back to her hometown and dealing with a murder case up there. Overall, the story was really, really good. I found that there was a lot of really heavy violence in this. Obviously, dealing with a detective murder mystery kind of a thing, you expect some violence. For me, the level of sexual violence, especially towards minors, and how graphic the depiction of it was unnecessary for me. And I feel like it happens really quickly in the story, like within the first 20 pages. And then I thought maybe it was setting something up in the story that would be a larger part of the story, and it kind of, to me, almost came across as unnecessary and gratuitous. Maybe because I do understand that this is a series, maybe as the series progresses, that is going to come into play a little bit more. But at least for this individual book, for me, I felt like it was a little unnecessary. Overall, though, the story was really good. I thought the mystery was really interesting. I do like the main character, Stone Child. She's strong and smart and clever. And I think it'll make for interesting reads as the series progresses. If book 2 comes out, I definitely will consider reading it when it does come out. Alright, so 4-star books. 4-star books are books I really enjoyed. I have a rule in my house that I am not allowed to keep a book unless I rate it 4 stars or higher, in which case I have to consider if I want to go buy myself a nice hardback copy. If I really love the book, then I buy myself a nice hardback copy to keep, and if not, then I go ahead and donate whatever copies I have to little free libraries in the area. So, my 4-star reads for this month: The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek by Kim Michelle Richardson, The Henna Artist by Alka Joshi, The Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boley, The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna, and Atomic Habits by James Clear. So, let's start with The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek. This is about the blue-skinned people of Kentucky and the pack horse librarians that brought books to the farthest reaches of the Appalachian Mountains. This, for me, was super interesting. I started reading this book, and I thought that it was completely fictional. I didn't realize that it was actually based on real events. I had never heard of the blue-skinned people of Kentucky. I had vaguely heard about the pack horse librarians once or twice, but I thought that was kind of just like a tie-in. And then I did research and found out that while this is not like an actual true story, it is based on true events. So that made it all the more interesting. I really loved the main character, Cussie Mary. She's tough, she's smart, she's determined. She just doesn't let anyone beat her down, and she goes through some horrific stuff, but she always keeps pushing for what she wants and what she needs. And I really respected her for that in the story. I thought that the story was very engaging. I really enjoyed reading it. Would highly, highly recommend it, especially if you have a particular interest in history, about the Appalachian region of the United States. Next up was The Henna Artist by Alka Joshi. This was such a good book. So I have traveled a lot. I've been to 25 countries, but as of yet, I have not been to India. It is on the very top of my list of places that I'd like to go next. So reading The Henna Artist for me was like a chance to travel and see a country that I don't know as much about yet. And the book is set in Jaipur, and the main character, Lakshmi, is a henna artist, and she does henna designs and different treatments for basically the upper echelon of society. And she's unique in that she had a very strange situation. She left home very young. She married, and there was complications, and she basically started from the bottom and built this beautiful career for herself. And it follows her adventures as she's doing henna for these, very, very prominent rich women. and how she's built herself into society. And it was just such a vibrant book. All of the characters are so rich and deep, and you can really imagine the settings that they're in. You can imagine the bustling streets of Jaipur, the beautiful elegant homes that she's in, the home she's building for herself, all these descriptions. It's just, everything was so sensory, and then talking about the henna pastes being made and all of the usage for henna and these different herbal remedies. It was just really fascinating. I learned a ton in this book, and I highly recommend it. I'm so pleased because I was just sent the second book in the series, The Secret Keeper of Jaipur, by my friend Laren, and I cannot wait to read it. I'm so excited. The Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulley. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. This is one of the prettiest books I think I've ever bought. I love the covers so much. It's just gorgeous all the way around. This book is set in the Ojibwe tribe, and the main character is half French and half indigenous Ojibwe. And she's kind of struggling a little bit with her place in society. Her indigenous family accepts her and welcomes her in, but some of the tribal members still kind of see her as less than or other because she's not full indigenous and she's not an official member of the tribe. She kind of gets brought into a mystery of sorts when her friend is murdered in front of her, and she gets kind of tied into an investigation. This book follows her story as the investigation proceeds, and it was really fascinating. There was a lot of cultural references in here. I've been very fortunate to learn about a lot of indigenous tribes throughout North and South America in my travels. I've been to a lot of countries where there was very, very big indigenous societies, and I've been fortunate in that way. But the Ojibwe tribe, I was not that familiar with. They come from the Sioux Nation, I believe it was Turtle Island. And I don't know that much about that particular region. I haven't actually traveled through that region of the States, and I don't know a ton of history. So for me, learning some of their cultural traditions, some of their words they use, some of the local language in here, all of that was really, really fascinating for me, and it made this book really unique. I highly recommend this. I've actually sent this as a gift to a friend because I loved it so much, and I would recommend it to anyone that wants to pick it up. I know that it's marked as YA, and I do understand, I guess, why it's marked as YA in some ways, but I actually think that any adult reading this would be perfectly happy with it as well. I didn't feel like it was childish or too young for me to read, so definitely consider picking that up. Next, I had The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. This book was really good. This was my first time reading Kristen Hanna. I've heard really good things about her, so I was excited about it. This book takes place in Texas during the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. And I just want to warn you, you have to be in the right headspace for this book. I feel like it is a pretty depressing read. The main character goes through a lot, considering, the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression and everything. So I wouldn't suggest reading this necessarily when you're already feeling depressed. You might want to read this when you're in a happier, more upbeat place, and maybe have a glass of hot cocoa ready for you for when you're done with it. But it is really, really good. The main character was really, really strong. Elsa, sorry, I was forgetting her name there for a second. Elsa is really strong, tough, independent, and the way that she goes through the trials and tribulations that she's faced with is pretty remarkable. I would highly, highly recommend this, especially if, like me, you didn't know that much about the Great Dust Bowl and the migration of Southerners to California. I think also this is very, very timely considering our current political situation in the United States. So in particular, if you're in the US and you need to read something that might parallel kind of some of the stuff that's going on here, this is a good book to pick up. And the other 4-star that I had was Atomic Habits by James Clear. That is also in the self-help spectrum. I enjoyed that one particularly because instead of just going, oh, do this and, things get better, he actually gives you a whole bunch of science-based fact behind how you build habits, the proper way to form habits, how to habit stack to make things more effective. So I didn't really read a lot of self-help prior to this month, and then I kind of decided that part of my goal in my reading expansion would be to like maybe read one self-help book a month and you know, work on a little bit of improvement. And you know, the other two that I had read, like I said, they had kind of an oversimplified message, or they just weren't delivering the right way. But with Atomic Habits, James Clear really starts the book by explaining how he learned about building habits, how he did this research. I mean, he treats it like it's a scientific paper. He doesn't just expect you to take his word for it. He goes into detail to support himself. And I really appreciated that. I found a lot of the tips and tricks that he gave in regards to building habits to be very practical and useful. And I've actually already incorporated a couple of them into my own life. So if you're looking for something to kind of work on your habits for the upcoming new year, this would be probably a good book to read this December. All right, so we're to our 5-star reads now. So if you've been watching my channel this month, you've probably heard me talk about a couple of these books as I've been reading them. I think 1 or 2 of them I actually haven't mentioned that much, but the other 2 I've definitely been popping up a lot. So one of the ones that I've mentioned probably the most is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This book is beautiful. It is a found family story. The main character is named Linus. He's a social worker, and he goes to the house in the Cerulean Sea to check up on 7 magical children and make sure that their needs are being met by the orphanage they're living in. It is such a warm, cozy story. This gave me like the feeling of being in a big warm hug, or drinking a hot cocoa under a fuzzy blanket while it's raining outside. After the darkness of October and all the horror and suspense and everything, this was such a well-needed break. I really just adored this book. And I'm not usually somebody that finds books like super warm and fuzzy and cozy. It's not my typical genre. I was really skeptical with all of the rave reviews that are out there on it, and I actually just ended up loving it. So if you need something to be a little bit of a pick-me-up, I would recommend this book. My other 5-star reviews were The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. I actually listened to this one on audiobook. The Vanishing Half is a story of twin siblings, and they are born in a town called Mallard, which everyone in Mallard has a lineage of African American descent, but the focus of the town is that they want to be light skinned. So like with each generation, people focus on like marrying somebody that has lighter skin than them and producing children that are lighter skinned. So we have the 2 sisters, and they leave Mallard and kind of start off on their own lives. And one sister decides to live as an African American woman. She marries an African American man and has, you know, an African American child, and lives her life with that identity. And the other sister, because they're so light, they're white passing, and she actually decides to pass off as white, and she marries a white man, and she never acknowledges her African American roots, where she comes from, anything. And it was fascinating. I actually only just finished it like a couple days ago, and I still am kind of mulling over everything in my head. This book deals with, you know, themes of racism, you know, perception of race, you know, the advantages that come with, you know, certain status. It's a lot of complex and difficult themes. My immediate reaction was a specific way, and then in sitting with the book and thinking about the material, I have to wonder if my reaction was the way that it was because I'm white and I don't understand what that particular character has gone through, or the choices that she's forced to make. And it's really interesting, and it's really caused me to be very introspective and think really deeply in the aftermath of the book. I couldn't put it down while I was listening to it. I listened to the whole thing on Thanksgiving while I was cooking, and I was really engrossed with it. So if you have it on your list, highly recommend reading it. If you don't actually have a physical copy of it and you can get the audiobook, I really recommend the audiobook actually, because the lady that narrated it did a fantastic job. She was so good with the different voices in it, and she was really clear because the POV changes throughout the story. But so she was always super clear on who was speaking. It was never confusing or difficult to follow. Highly, highly recommend it. After that would be Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. So this was an interesting book for me. It started out and I thought I was going to hate it. I found the main character really difficult to like, and I was like, I don't think I can do a whole book from her perspective. I actually was concerned that I was going to like have like a 2-star read or maybe not be able to finish it. But I had heard so much good stuff about it, and I was like, let me just persevere a little while longer. And I'm so glad I did, because that little while longer, the story really picks up, and we kind of find out about Eleanor and why she is the way she is. And it is tragic and heartbreaking and inspiring and uplifting and so many different things. It deals with disabilities, trauma, all sorts of different topics that are really important to talk about. I will say that it does have heavy trigger warnings for abuse in there. So if you've personally been a victim of child abuse and that's like a sensitive subject for you, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for you in that case. But for anyone where they're okay reading about child abuse, this particular story is so moving and so thoughtfully done. Highly, highly recommend it. And then the final 5-star book is Crying in H Mart. I read this over the last week, and this is a memoir by Michelle Zauner, and it focuses on the loss of her mother. She loses her mother to cancer, and her mother, so Michelle Zauner is half white and half Korean, and her mother is like the only link to her culture. She writes that in the book, that she feels that her mother's her only link to her Korean identity. And when her mother dies, she feels that absence very, very deeply. And she talks about, being in Korean restaurants, eating Korean food, and feeling resentment towards, the old lady at the table next to her because, she wonders why that lady's there but not her mother. Or like being in H Mart, which is a Korean market, and feeling this profound sadness as she's looking at things that her and her mother enjoyed together. For me, this book was just so poignant and moving. The writing is so poetic, and the description of these memories is just so profound. You can feel her grief in the pages, and it, even though, like, for example, the food that she's talking about, I didn't grow up with a lot of Korean food, so I'm not familiar with all the foods that she's talking about, but I understand the sentiment because I'm a chef for a living. I also associate my memories with foods and smells and tastes and things. So I understand that feeling of sitting down to eat something and being transported instantaneously to a specific memory. For me, this pulled at a lot of heartstrings, and I think for me, this was definitely the most emotional read of the month. I think if you are in need of a cry, you're in need of getting in touch with your feelings a little bit, this would be a great book. Or if you're dealing with loss, and you need to feel like somebody else understands your loss, I think that this would be a good book as well. And it'll make you feel like less alone in your grief. So those would be my 5-star reads. I would highly recommend all 4 of them. They were excellent. And that is the end of the books in terms of the star ratings. I'm just going to tell you what I'm reading and listening to right now, and then we'll wrap everything up. All right, so we're going to finish up the last couple things. My currently reading is All the Murmuring Bones by A.J. Slater. I picked this book up at Halloween time. It was on the horror display, and I meant to read it in October during my horror binge. Unfortunately, I didn't get to it because I bought like triple the amount of books that I needed for the month. So I'm working through some of those. This one is set in Ireland and focuses on Irish folklore. There's mer people and all sorts of interesting creatures, and the family in the book is beholden to some of those interesting creatures. But the main character, Mirren, has no desire to be part of any of it. I'm loving it so far. I really enjoy Mirren and her spunky personality. There's a lot of mystery and intrigue going on with the contract between her family and the mer people. So I'm really looking forward to finishing that up. I'm hopeful that I'll have it finished maybe by the end of the week. And I'm also reading The Song of Achilles, or I'm about to start reading. I have that picked out next. I was actually supposed to read it last week, and with some things going on, I just didn't have time to get into it. So once I finish all the Murmuring Bones, I'll be jumping into the Song of Achilles. And meanwhile, I've got to figure out what my TBR is going to be like for Christmas. So real quick before we wrap up, a few statistics. In total, I read 5,950 pages this month. That was over 18 books. And my shortest read of the month was Atomic Habits by James Clear. My longest read of the month was The Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulley. So Atomic Habits came in at 168 pages, and Firekeeper's Daughter came in at 488. We already talked about what my least favorite book of the month was. That was No One Is Talking About That by Patricia Lockwood. Probably my favorite read of the month. It's so hard to choose because all of the 5-star books were so good. I would say probably for me it would be Crying in H Mart, just because I really related to her grief and how she expresses her grief. And for me, it really made me feel a lot of things. After that, probably The Vanishing Half, just because I was so invested in the story and understanding these two sisters and their different choices. And like I said, it's days since I've read it and listened to it, and I'm still really pondering it and its implications. So I would say that those are probably my top two. And so I think that was a pretty good reading month for me. 18 books in 1 month is a pretty significant amount. I tend to read, a pretty decent amount every month, but 18 for me is still quite a bit. I do think that some of them were quite a bit shorter, so that benefited me. I had, 4. I had 5 books that were under 300 pages. So I think for me, that kind of helped me get to a higher amount. I do tend to read mostly between 300 to 500 pages. This month, it just seemed like a lot of the books were shorter. On average, most of them seemed to be right between 300 and 400. And nothing went above 500. So lots of shorter reads this month. I think that helped me kind of pick up those numbers. So anyways, this was my November TBR. If you're interested in, or not TBR, but my November end of the month update, if you're interested in seeing any of my other previous reading updates, you can look for this link up here. I have my stuff from October, so you can look into that and see what I read in that month and how I rated those things as well. And if you're happy with this video, you liked what I had to say, enjoyed the books that I was talking about, maybe give me a thumbs up just so I know. Having some feedback really helps me know what direction to take my videos in the future. And leave me a comment if you agree or if you disagree. I want to hear how you felt about my ratings. Did I rate any of your favorites low? Did I rate any of books that you didn't like high? Do you agree, disagree? Tell me all about it. Literally, I just want to talk books in the comments. So come shout at me about books. And if you're not already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. It's down here somewhere. And also hit the notification bell so you never miss a single post from me. I just recently changed up my posting schedule, so I'm posting quite frequently. I post tag Tuesdays. Tuesday I do some kind of a book tag. Wednesday I do a 5-minute book review where I go into detail on one of the books that I've read recently. Thursdays I do a long form video like this where I talk about bookish topics. And Friday I do a book related recipe where I take a book like this that I'm reading, pick a food item that they mention in the book, create a recipe, and then I teach you how to make it in the comfort of your own home. I'm also considering adding a blog, a reading blog, maybe on Mondays. So if those things all sound interesting to you, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. I also post lots of shorts with book mail and things like that if you're interested in those things. Thank you so much. I'm Caitlin Bandy. This is Bandysbooks. We'll see you in the next one.